It was my daughter's 8th birthday and she wouldn't blow out the candles. That sounds like a small thing. A mood, a shy moment, a kid being oversensitive about turning a year older. But I'd been watching Sophie, my granddaughter, my daughter's little girl, for the past hour, and what I was seeing wasn't shyness. It was something else entirely. She stood at the end of the dining table in my daughter's house in Barrie, staring at the cake my wife had driven 2 hours to pick up from that bakery on Dunlop Street she loves. Pink frosting. Little fondant horse on top, because horses were all Sophie ever talked about. All year, every year. She wasn't looking at the horse, she was looking at the back door. I'm a retired RCMP officer. 31 years. I know what fear looks like, real fear, not the performative kind. And that little girl standing in her party dress with her hands clasped in front of her was afraid. My son-in-law, Russ, stood beside her with his hand on her shoulder. His grip looked easy, relaxed, casual, but Sophie's small body was completely rigid underneath it. "Come on, sweetheart," my daughter Pauline said from across the table, her voice bright in the way people's voices get when they're working too hard at something. "Make a wish." Sophie turned and looked at me, just for a second, and what I saw in her face made the back of my neck go cold. I blew it off. I told myself I was wrong. I was not wrong. After cake, the kids scattered into the backyard. 2 of Sophie's school friends, my nephew's boy from down the road. Pauline was in the kitchen cleaning up. Russ had stepped outside onto the deck to check his phone, the way he always seemed to be checking his phone. I found Sophie sitting on the stairs to the 2nd floor, still in her party dress, picking at the icing on the piece of cake she hadn't eaten. "Hey, birthday girl." I sat down beside her on the step. I had to angle sideways to fit. "You doing okay?" She shrugged without looking up. "Not the best birthday," another shrug. Then quietly, "I don't like the garage." I kept my voice even. "What's that, the garage?" She looked down at her plate. "I don't like going in there. How come?" She went very still. The kind of still a child goes when they've already said more than they meant to. "Sophie." I kept my voice low, just between us. "Is somebody asking you to go in the garage?" Her fork made a small scraping sound against the plate. She didn't answer. From the kitchen, Pauline called out something about loot bags. "Normal sounds, normal house. It's okay," I said. "You don't have to tell me right now." Sophie looked up at me then. She had her mother's eyes, that particular shade of hazel that catches light funny, and they were full of something I recognized from 31 years of interviewing people who wanted to tell the truth but were too frightened to. "He said it's a special time," she said. Very soft. "He said if I told, Mommy would be really, really sad." I felt my chest go tight. "Who, sweetheart?" But Russ appeared at the top of the hall, looking down at us. Sophie's shoulders went up around her ears. "There you are," he said, easy and warm, the way he always was. "Come on outside, Soph. Your friends are asking for you." She got up without a word and went past him toward the back door. He watched her go, then glanced down at me with that mild, pleasant expression he'd always had. "She doing okay? She's been a bit off today." "Kids and birthdays," I said. He nodded and went back to the kitchen. I sat on those stairs for another minute, not moving. In my career, I'd interviewed child victims 7 times. 7 is not a lot, but it's enough that you never forget the cadence of it. The way they speak around the thing they can't say. The way their body carries information their words haven't delivered yet. I wanted to be wrong. God, I wanted to be wrong. Russ was my son-in-law. He and Pauline had been together 11 years. I'd been at their wedding. I'd been in the room when Sophie was born. I'd watched him coach her soccer team for 3 seasons running, this patient, quiet man who remembered every kid's name and always stayed to stack the pylons. I drove home that night and didn't say a word to my wife. At 2 in the morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee, staring at nothing, the garage. He said it's a special time. I spent the next 4 days doing nothing useful. I told myself Sophie was 8 years old and had a complicated imagination. I told myself she'd said something half-formed and I'd built a whole structure out of it. I told myself that if I was wrong, if I blew up my daughter's marriage and my granddaughter's life over a misread moment on a staircase, I would never forgive myself. On the 5th day, I called a woman I'd worked with for years, a retired child forensic interviewer named Colleen who now consulted privately. I didn't give her names. I gave her the words Sophie had used and asked her what she thought. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "The framing," she said carefully. "That special time language. The warning about Mom being sad. That's not random. I know. You need to report it. If I'm wrong, if you're wrong, they investigate and find nothing. That's the outcome. Kids don't make up that specific language pattern on their own, Ray." She was the only person who still called me by my old department nickname. "You know this." I did know this. I'd always known this. What I didn't know was how to look my daughter in the face. Pauline called me the following Saturday morning, which was unusual. We usually talked Sundays. "Dad, did you say something to Sophie after her birthday?" My pulse spiked. "We had a little chat on the stairs." "Yeah. Why?" "She's been asking if she can sleep over at your place." A pause. Like a lot. She asked 3 times this week. She doesn't usually do that. She's welcome anytime. You know that. Another pause. Longer this time. Is everything okay? I had the evidence of 31 years of training on one side and the evidence of 11 years of family dinners on the other, and I made the worst decision I could have made in that moment. I said, yes, everything's fine. That afternoon, I drove to Pauline's neighborhood and parked down the street. I don't know what I was doing. Retired cops do stupid things when they're wrestling with something. I sat there for an hour watching nothing, then drove home. The next morning, I called the CAS, the Children's Aid Society. I'd made that call before, from a duty phone, in uniform, with a file number already assigned. This was different. This was my voice, shaking slightly, giving my granddaughter's name. The intake worker was calm and professional. She took the information. She told me someone would be in contact. I hung up and sat in my truck in the driveway for a long time. The investigation moved slowly and then all at once. A child protection worker named Tremblay, a quiet, serious woman in her 40s, contacted Pauline to arrange what they called a well-being check. Pauline called me immediately, panicked, asking what was happening. I told her I didn't know. That was the second lie I'd told her in a week, and it tasted worse than the first. The forensic interview with Sophie happened at a child advocacy center in Barrie. I wasn't there. I wasn't allowed to be there. I sat in the waiting room of my own house for 6 hours, waiting for a call that didn't come until nearly 8 that night. It was Tremblay. Her voice was careful in the way that tells you the news is not good. Sophie disclosed. A pause. She was consistent and detailed. The language she used, the context she described. Our team is treating this as credible. We're moving to the next stage, the garage. My voice came out strange and flat. Among other details, yes. The next stage happened fast. Russ was removed from the home. Pauline was notified. The OPP were brought in for the criminal investigation. Search warrants were issued. I don't know everything they found in that garage. I know enough. A locked cabinet Pauline had never opened because Russ had always said it was just tools and automotive stuff. A padlock that took 2 specific keys. A camera that wasn't there for tools or automotive anything. 3 years. Sophie had been 4 when it started. When I think about that, I have to stop thinking about it. I just have to. My daughter called me from her sister-in-law's house, where she'd gone with Sophie the night Russ was arrested. She wasn't crying when I answered. Pauline always cried when she was upset from the time she was small, and the silence on the other end of the phone was total. Dad. Her voice was very controlled. Did you know? I suspected. After Sophie's birthday. How long after? About a week. The silence stretched so long I checked my phone to see if the call had dropped. A week, she repeated. Pauline, a week, and you made a report, but you didn't tell me. Not a question. A fact she was laying out and examining. I lived in that house. Sophie was in that house. I know you should have told me. Yes, I should have. There was nothing else to say to that. She was right. In trying to protect her from uncertainty, I'd made a decision about her life that wasn't mine to make. It was the same mistake, in a different shape, that a lot of people make when they think protecting someone means managing what they know. She didn't hang up. She just went quiet for a while. Is she going to be okay? She finally asked. I think so. I really think so. But it's going to take time. How much time? I didn't have an answer for that. I told her the truth. Russ's arrest was not front-page news, but it was regional news. His name appeared in the Barrie Examiner and then circulated in the way things do online now, quietly and permanently. People who'd coached soccer with him, who'd had him and Pauline over for dinner, who'd thought of him as that steady, dependable guy with the good handshake. They all had to revise something in themselves. That's one of the things nobody tells you about these cases. The revision, the going back through every memory and asking, what did I miss? What did I explain away? What was I not willing to see? His lawyer argued that the evidence had procedural issues. He was wrong about that, but the attempt cost another 4 months and put Sophie through one additional interview that she shouldn't have had to do. Each time she had to retell any part of it, something in her face went briefly away and then came back. His parents, Russ's parents, called Pauline twice in the first month. The first time to express shock and disbelief. The second time less kindly to suggest that Sophie might be confused, that children sometimes misremember, that this couldn't be what it looked like. Pauline didn't answer the second call. She texted back one sentence and then changed her number. Sophie's therapist was a woman in Collingwood, a specialist in childhood trauma whose waiting list was 8 months, but who had a cancellation and took Sophie within 3 weeks of disclosure. Her name was Dr. Nkosi. She had an office with a sand tray and a fish tank and a particular talent for sitting with silence without filling it. I met her once, briefly, in the hallway after a session. She shook my hand and looked at me steadily. She talks about you, she said. She calls you the one who listened. I had to look away. Pauline moved back to Barrie proper. She found a 2-bedroom apartment in a building on the south end, close to Sophie's school, and I spent 2 weekends helping her set it up. Sophie chose the color of her bedroom walls, a pale yellow that she said looked like morning, and we painted it together on a Sunday, the three of us, with music on and the windows open. There were good moments that year and there were hard ones. The hard ones were harder than I'd anticipated. Sophie had nightmares, irregular and sudden, the kind that left her disoriented and wide-eyed at 2 in the morning, standing in the hall outside her bedroom door. Pauline would sit with her on the floor sometimes until she settled. Some nights I got calls at midnight, and I drove over and sat in their living room until dawn. I didn't mind. Every time I drove over in the dark, I thought about the fact that I'd waited a week, that I'd sat in my kitchen with a cold cup of coffee and talked myself out of certainty. If I'd called sooner, if I'd trusted the thing I knew in my chest the moment Sophie looked at me at that birthday table, maybe 1 week fewer would have passed with her in that house. Dr. Nkosi told me, during one of the family sessions she occasionally included me in, that this kind of thinking wasn't productive, that a week was not a long time in the context of a 3-year pattern, that I had acted when many people would not have acted at all, that the variable of self-doubt is not something to be subtracted from the outcome when the outcome is already good. She was right. I know she was right. I still think about the week. The trial was 8 months after the arrest. I sat in that courtroom for every day of it, which is something I could do because I was retired and had nowhere else to be. Pauline came for some of it. Sophie did not testify in open court. Her forensic interview was admitted as a statement with additional protective measures in place, which is standard procedure for child witnesses in Ontario and which I was grateful for. Russ's counsel was good. I'll say that. He was a Toronto defense lawyer named Percival who knew his charter law and argued the case methodically, without theatrics. He raised questions about the chain of evidence on the camera footage, about the specificity of Sophie's statements. He implied carefully that Pauline had been going through marital difficulties and that Sophie might have absorbed anxiety from her mother. It was the kind of lawyering that's designed to make you doubt what you know. I watched the jury and tried to read their faces. The jury came back in 4 days. Guilty on all counts. I don't remember what I did in the moment they read it. My daughter was sitting beside me and I think we just looked at each other. I remember her exhaling this long, slow breath like she'd been holding it for months. Which she had been. At sentencing, the judge, a woman in her 60s with an economy of language I respected, read from a 7-page prepared statement. She addressed Russ directly and without euphemism. She described the abuse in the terms the evidence had established it. She said, among other things, that the particular cruelty of committing this kind of harm against a person in your care, a person whose safety you were trusted with, was a cruelty that the court took seriously. He was sentenced to 14 years. Given the nature of the offenses and the aggravating factors, he would serve a minimum of 10 before eligibility for parole. He showed nothing when it was read. No reaction at all. That blankness I'd always misread as calm. It was just blankness all the way down. Russ's parents sent a letter to Pauline 6 weeks after sentencing, not an apology, a request, for updates on Sophie for some form of ongoing connection. They referred to themselves as Sophie's grandparents, which was accurate in a biological sense and felt grotesque in every other sense. Pauline did not respond. I thought she was right not to. About a year after it all came down, I ran into one of the soccer parents at a Canadian Tire in town, a man I'd chatted with at a dozen games, whose daughter had played on Sophie's team. He recognized me and stopped, and we stood there in the plumbing aisle for a moment with the awkwardness of two people who share context they'd both rather not share. "How's your little one doing?" he asked. "Getting there," I said. "She's a tough kid." He nodded, and then he said something I've thought about since. "I had him over for a barbecue. Like 2 weeks before. Seemed completely normal." "Yeah," I said. "They often do." We said goodbye, and I stood there among the pipe fittings for a minute after he walked away. They often do, that's the part. That's the part that doesn't get easier to sit with no matter how many years you spend in this work or adjacent to this work. The people who do the most damage to children are rarely the obvious ones. They're the ones who seem steady and kind and involved. They're the ones who help stack the pylons after practice. Sophie is 10 now. She still sees Dr. Nkosi once a month, down from twice a week, gradual, uneven, real. She started horseback riding last spring, which has been something to watch. She's fearless on a horse. She goes after it with both hands and no hesitation. And I think horses are the right thing for her right now because they're large and they have weight and they don't ask complicated things of you. They just ask you to show up and be present. She called me last week to tell me her horse's name was Buckley and that Buckley had let her canter for the first time. "Grandpa," she said, "I wasn't even scared." I said that was wonderful. I said I was proud of her. "You always say that," she said. "I always mean it," I said. She laughed. 8-year-olds don't laugh the same way 10-year-olds do. There's less caution in it. I noticed that. Pauline and I talked about it properly, the conversation we'd avoided for months, about a year after the trial. We drove out to Wasaga Beach on a weekday in October, when it was empty and cold, and the water was that particular flat gray it gets in autumn. We walked along the sand and she asked me what I'd actually been thinking, that week between Sophie's birthday and the call to Cass. I told her the truth, that I'd been thinking about what happened if I was wrong, that I'd let the fear of wrecking things I cared about slow me down from protecting the person who needed protecting the most. She was quiet for a while. The wind off the lake was doing what it does in October up there, that clean, aggressive cold that gets into your collar. I did the same thing, she said finally, for longer. I looked at her. I noticed things. The way she always chose her words when she was being precise about something, small things. Sophie not wanting to go in the garage when Russ was in there. Getting clingy at night sometimes. I told myself it was nothing. Kids are weird, phases. She paused. I told myself for probably 2 years. I didn't say anything. I think about that a lot. Her voice stayed level. I think I might always think about that. We walked another while without talking. The beach curved out ahead of us and the lake was enormous and cold and not interested in us at all, which was strangely okay. You got her out, I said. You got her out. We got her out. She stopped walking and looked at me, and then she put her arm through mine the way she used to do when she was small, walking somewhere beside me, and we stood there looking at the water for a while. There are things I want to say directly, because I spent 31 years in a job where directness was the only thing that actually worked. Children don't usually say things like that spontaneously. When a child says something specific, something about a place they're afraid of, a time that's described as special, something about what will happen to someone they love if they tell, that is not something they invented. Children don't have the framework for that kind of disclosure without a reason. The research on this is clear and has been clear for a long time. If a child in your life says something that makes the back of your neck go cold, trust that feeling. You were given that feeling for a reason. It's not accusation, it's attention. Don't wait for certainty the way I waited. The standard for reporting suspected child abuse in Ontario and across Canada is not proof. It's reasonable suspicion. You are not the investigator. You are the person who makes the call and lets the investigators do their work. That's it. That's the whole job. Call the Children's Aid Society for your province. If you believe a child is in immediate danger, call 911. If you're not sure which applies, call both. Abusers are not usually strangers. They are people who've spent time building trust inside the family and outside it. They are coaches and neighbors and partners and relatives. Their public face is often their best defense. Don't let that confuse you. And if you are an adult who was harmed as a child, and you're watching or reading this and recognizing something, the fear, the isolation, the particular cruelty of being told your silence is protecting the people you love, I want you to know that it was not your fault. Whatever you were told, whatever shape that told took, it was not the truth. You were a child and someone made you responsible for something no child can be responsible for. That was their failure, completely, in every direction. Sophie knows this now. She's working on believing it, which is different from knowing it, and the belief will take as long as it takes. Dr. Nkosi tells me that resilience isn't the absence of damage. It's what grows through the damage, slowly, toward the light. I watch my granddaughter ride her horse on a Saturday morning, and I think that's probably right. She still calls me the one who listened. I still think about the week I almost didn't.